Hey listeners, if you haven't already, join the family by subscribing so you never miss another one of these stories. Let's get to 1,000 subs together. Now relax and enjoy. I work in an old church, not as a priest or anything holy, just as a caretaker, a keeper of the dust and the silence that seems to have been baked into the stones over centuries. The job came to me out of sheer necessity, a need to pay rent and eat something more than instant noodles, and I figured it would be quiet, maybe even peaceful, a place to just be alone with my thoughts. And it is, mostly, but it's a specific kind of quiet, a heavy kind that feels less like an absence of sound and more like a presence listening back to you. The church itself is a hulking Gothic thing on the edge of town, all spires that claw at the sky and stained glass windows that tell stories of suffering and revelation in colored light. The kind of place that feels ancient, not just old, like it was built on something much older and far less forgiving. And the rules, they gave me a list on my first day. A single sheet of yellowed paper typed on an old machine, the letters faint and uneven. Rule 1. The west door is to be locked at all times. No exceptions, not for fire, not for flood. It is never to be opened. Rule 2. The bells in the bell tower are never to be rung. Not for practice, not for celebration. Their ropes are to be inspected for wear, but never pulled. Rule 3. The old pipe organ may be tuned and its keys may be cleaned, but the stop labeled Vox Day is never to be engaged under any circumstances. Rule 4. If you hear singing from the choir loft when it is empty, do not investigate. Return to the caretaker's office and wait until it stops. Rule 5. The reflection in the baptismal font is to be checked each morning. If the water is clear, proceed with your day. If it appears cloudy or dark, leave the premises immediately and do not return until the following sunrise. Rule 6. Never, under any circumstances, acknowledge the figure you may see standing in the far right pew at the edge of your vision. It is not there for you. These were the rules, typed out so matter-of-factly. And the old priest who hired me, a man with eyes that had seen too much and a voice that was little more than a dry whisper, just looked at me and said, "These are not suggestions. They are instructions for your continued well-being. Follow them and you will be fine. Break them and we cannot help you." I remember laughing a little on the inside, thinking it was all some weird hazing ritual for the new guy. A bit of Gothic flavor to go with the Gothic workplace, but the look on his face stripped all the humor from the thought. He was dead serious, so I took the paper, nodded, and decided that for $15 an hour, I could humor a few eccentricities. The first few weeks were uneventful. Just me and the dust bunnies and the long, slanting rays of light cutting through the perpetual gloom. I'd sweep the aisles, polish the wooden pews until they gleamed under the weak electric lights we'd installed, and check the reflection in the large, stone baptismal font at the back. The water was always clear, mirror-like, showing only the vaulted ceiling high above. The silence was my constant companion, and I grew used to its weight, though I never quite got comfortable with the way it would sometimes feel interrupted. Like I'd walked into a room just after a conversation had ended, the air still vibrating with unheard words. I was careful, meticulous even, with the rules. I kept the west door locked with a heavy iron key that felt cold even on the warmest days. I gave the bell ropes a wide berth, and I never once looked at the organ stops for too long. The figure in the pew, well, I thought that was just my mind playing tricks, the product of an overactive imagination in a very creepy setting. Sometimes, out of the corner of my eye, I'd catch a dark shape, a suggestion of a person sitting perfectly still in the last pew on the right. But whenever I turned my head, nothing would be there, just the empty space and the lingering feeling of being watched. It was easy to dismiss, until one Tuesday evening in late October. The days were getting shorter, and the church was plunged into deep shadow. By 4 in the afternoon, I was running behind, trying to finish up the mopping so I could get home. The wind was howling outside, a low moan that rattled the windows and their leaded frames. And that's when I heard it, a faint, ethereal singing, It was coming from the choir loft, high above the entrance. It was a hymn, I think, but the melody was all wrong, twisted and minor. The voices didn't sound human. They were too high, too pure, and yet somehow frayed at the edges, like old silk tearing. I froze, mop handle slick in my grip, and I remembered Rule 4, do not investigate, return to the office, and wait. Every instinct, every curious bone in my body screamed at me to look, to just climb the stairs and peek, to see what could possibly be making that beautiful, terrible sound. But the priest's warning echoed in my head, and the sheer unnatural quality of the noise pushed me into motion. I all but ran back to the small caretaker's office, shut the door, and put my back against it. My heart was hammering against my ribs. The singing didn't stop. It seemed to weave through the stone walls, seeping under the door. It felt like it was inside my head. I sat there on the floor for what felt like hours, until finally, the last note faded away, leaving nothing but the sound of the wind. The silence that returned felt different, charged, like the air after a lightning strike. I waited a long time before I ventured out. The church was empty, dark, and still. I didn't finish mopping. I just grabbed my coat and left, locking the main door behind me with trembling hands. That was the first time I understood that the rules were not a joke. After that, things felt different. The church felt less like a building and more like an occupant I shared space with. I became hyper-aware of the rules, treating them not as a list, but as a ritual, a necessary liturgy to keep something at bay. I started checking the baptismal font with a reverence that bordered on fear. Each morning I'd approach it with a tightness in my chest, relief flooding me when I saw my own worried face reflected back from the clear, still water. The figure in the pew became more persistent. I wouldn't just see a flicker. I'd see the full shape for a split second before it vanished. A man, I thought, dressed in dark, old-fashioned clothes, just sitting there, staring straight ahead at the altar, never moving, never looking at me. But his presence was a cold spot in the church, a drain on all the warmth and light. I learned to never look directly at that pew, to keep my eyes forward, to pretend I didn't feel the weight of his gaze on the back of my neck. It was an exhausting way to work, constantly policing my own perceptions, but the money was good and the hours were flexible, and a stubborn part of me refused to be driven out by what I still tried to tell myself were just quirks of an old building. The breaking point came on a rainy night in November. I'd stayed late to do a deep clean of the sacristy, the small room where the priests prepare for services. It was filled with old robes, golden vessels, and the smell of incense and old wood. As I was moving a heavy cabinet to sweep behind it, I found a small, hidden door set into the wall. It was unlocked, and my curiosity, that damned human impulse that has doomed so many before me, got the better of me. Inside was a narrow staircase leading down into pitch blackness. The air that wafted up was cold and carried a smell I can only describe as dry and ancient, like old bones and dust from a tomb. I knew I shouldn't. Every rule-following cell in my body told me to close the door and forget I ever saw it. But I couldn't. I fetched a flashlight from my toolbox and pointed it down the stairs. They were stone, worn smooth by centuries of footsteps that shouldn't exist. I descended, the temperature dropping with each step. The staircase opened into a small crypt. It was unlike the main church. It was simpler, cruder. The walls were rough-hewn stone, and in the center was a single plain sarcophagus. It was unadorned, just a long flat stone lid, and resting on top of it was a large iron key. Unlike the key for the west door, this one was bigger, blackened with age, and it felt wrong. Looking at it made my skin crawl. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the marrow, that this was the key for the west door, the one that was never to be opened. And I knew, just as certainly, that I was never meant to find it. I backed away, taking the stairs two at a time. I shoved the cabinet back in front of the door, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I had broken a rule I didn't even know existed. I had trespassed. I had seen something I wasn't supposed to see. For the next week, I was a nervous wreck. Every creak of the old building made me jump. The figure in the pew was there more often than not. No longer a fleeting glimpse, but a constant, solid presence out of the corner of my eye. He never moved, but I felt his attention on me, a patient, waiting attention. The singing happened again, twice, and each time it was louder, closer. The twisted hymn felt like it was scraping at the inside of my skull. I started having dreams of the key, of the west door, in the dreams. I would put the key in the lock and turn it, and the door would swing open to reveal not the outside world, but an endless, hungry darkness, a blackness so complete it felt like a solid thing, a wall of nothing that promised everything and nothing all at once. In the dream, I could feel that darkness pulling at me, a gentle, insistent tug on my soul, and from within it, I could hear a faint, rhythmic sound, like a massive, slow heartbeat echoing from 1,000,000 miles away, or the deep, resonant toll of a bell submerged in a black ocean. I would try to pull back, to slam the door shut, but my dream self was frozen, compelled to step forward, to enter that void, and I would always wake up at the same moment, my body jerking violently, gasping for air that felt thin and used up. My small bedroom would be icy, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and makes your teeth ache, a cold that felt borrowed from that stone crypt beneath the church. The silence in my apartment in those moments was worse than any sound. It was a thick, listening silence, as if the aftermath of my gasp was being noted and recorded by something in the corners of the room. I would lie there for hours, wrapped in every blanket I owned, watching the digital numbers on my clock change, too afraid to close my eyes again, too afraid of what I might see waiting for me in my own sleep. The final straw, the thing that shattered the last of my rationalizations, was the baptismal font. It was a Thursday morning, gray and damp, with a fog that clung to the streets like a shroud. I had slept fitfully, the dream of the key and the door lingering like a bad taste in my mind. The walk to the church felt longer than usual, every sound from the waking world. A distant car, a barking dog, seemed muffled and unreal, as if I were already moving into a separate, insulated space. The heavy main door of the church groaned as I pushed it open, a sound that always felt like a protest, and the atmosphere inside was different, heavier. The air was stale and motionless, yet it hummed with a faint, almost subaudible energy, like a wire carrying a current just before it overloads. I went through my usual routine on autopilot, my mind still half trapped in the residue of the nightmare. I hung up my coat, filled my bucket with water, and collected my cleaning supplies. My movements were sluggish, burdened by a dread I couldn't quite name. And then it was time for the check, the daily ritual that had become the barometer for my safety. I walked down the center aisle, my footsteps echoing too loudly in the profound stillness. The font stood there, a simple stone basin that had suddenly become the most important object in my world. As I approached, a wrongness settled over me, a primal alarm ringing in the back of my skull. The air around the font was colder, a pocket of deep chill that made the fine hairs on my arms stand up. I told myself it was just my nerves, that the nightmare had me spooked. I leaned over the familiar stone rim, my hands gripping the cold edge for balance, and I looked down, my breath caught in my throat. My heart, which had been doing its now familiar nervous dance, seemed to stop entirely. The water was black, not a shadowy dark, not a murky cloudiness from stirred sediment, but a pure, lightless, absolute black. It was the black from my dreams, a liquid void. It had no surface, no reflection, no quality of water at all. It was a hole, a perfect circle of nothingness carved into the reality of the church floor. It didn't reflect the vaulted ceiling above or the colored light from the windows. It consumed the light, drawing it in and offering nothing back. I stared into that abyss, and a vertigo seized me. A terrifying sensation that I was about to fall into it, that this wasn't a pool of liquid, but a vertical shaft leading down into an infinite dark. My own face was gone, my identity erased from the surface, and in its place was this terrifying emptiness. Rule 5 screamed in my mind, a frantic, internal shout: leave the premises immediately, and do not return until the following sunrise. The words were no longer just text on a yellowed page. They were a lifeline, a command from someone who had known this horror and survived it long enough to write the warning. I didn't need to be told twice. I stumbled backward, my legs weak and uncoordinated. I didn't think about my bag, my coat, my lunch sitting on the desk in the office. My only thought was escape. I turned and ran, my shoes slapping against the stone floor, the sound too loud, too frantic in the holy silence. I imagined that black water bubbling over the rim of the font. Sprinting across the floor, chasing me, I didn't look back. I hit the main doors with my shoulder. Bursting out into the gray morning light, the fog felt warm and welcoming compared to the cold inside. I ran all the way home, my lungs burning, not stopping until I had slammed my apartment door shut and locked every lock I had. I spent the day in a state of heightened alert, every creak of the old building making me jump, the buzz of the refrigerator sounding like a distant chant. I called in sick, my voice a shaky rasp, and I kept all the lights on, trying to banish the memory of that absolute blackness with the weak glow of 60-watt bulbs. The following day was a war within myself. A part of me, the sensible, survival part, begged me to quit, to never set foot in that place again, to block its number and pretend it never existed. But another part, a part poisoned by a terrible curiosity and a sense of responsibility, argued back. If I didn't go back, they would hire someone else. Some innocent person who would be given the list of rules with no context, who might dismiss them as I initially had, who might hear the singing and climb the stairs to investigate, who might find the key. That thought was unbearable. My foolishness had already triggered something. I couldn't abandon my post and let another person walk into that. And deeper still, beneath the fear and the guilt, was the need to know. Had my transgression been forgiven? Had the system reset? Was the water clear again? Or had I broken something permanently? I had to see. The need was a physical ache. I arrived just after dawn. The sky a pale, washed-out gray. The church looked different now. Not just old, but predatory. Its Gothic spires no longer clawed at the sky, but seemed to be pulling it down, drawing the gloom into itself. The main door was heavier than I remembered, requiring all my strength to push open. The inside was colder than usual, a deep, seeped-in cold that the morning sun couldn't touch. The silence was the worst it had ever been. So absolute it felt like a physical pressure on my eardrums. A vacuum waiting to be filled by a sound I never wanted to hear again. I ignored everything else. My cleaning cart, the dusty pews, the ominous silence from the choir loft. I walked straight to the font, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. My hands were shaking so badly I had to press them against the cold stone rim to steady them. I took a deep, shuddering breath, bracing myself for the void, and I looked down. For a single glorious second, relief so potent it made me dizzy washed over me. The water was clear, perfectly, beautifully, normally clear. It held the reflection of the high vaulted ceiling, the soft morning light filtering through the rose window. It was just water. I nearly cried. A choked sob of pure release escaping my lips, the tension drained from my shoulders. Maybe it was over. Maybe whatever I had disturbed had settled back down. Maybe the rules had worked their magic and contained my mistake. That's when I saw it. The reflection was too perfect, too detailed. It wasn't just showing the ceiling. It was also showing the figure from the pew. He was standing right behind me, clear as day in the water's mirror surface. I spun around, my breath catching in my throat, a strangled sound of pure fear. The aisle behind me was empty. The space where he should have been was vacant, just dusty air and quiet pews. Confused, terrified, I looked back into the water, and he was still there in the reflection, standing exactly where my own back should have been. But now he was different. He was no longer a passive shape on the periphery. He was looking directly at me. His face was pale and gaunt, skin stretched tight over sharp bone. His eyes were deep pools of shadow. Not just dark, but empty, like the black water had been. And he was smiling, a thin, terrible smile that stretched his mouth in a way that was utterly wrong. It held no warmth, no humor, no humanity, only a vast and ancient hunger. an intelligence that was profoundly alien and malicious. In the reflection, he slowly raised a hand, a long-fingered, pale hand, and pointed, not at my reflected image, but past me, beyond the frame of the reflection, down the main aisle towards the front of the church, towards the west door. I couldn't move. I was trapped by that gaze, paralyzed by that smile that existed only in the wrong, inverted world of the water. My body was frozen solid, my muscles locked in sheer terror. I could hear my own blood roaring in my ears, a frantic counterpoint to the overwhelming silence. With a monumental effort that felt like tearing my own soul, I forced myself to turn my head, to follow the line of his pointing finger in the real world. I looked down the long aisle, past the rows of empty pews, towards the front of the church, towards the west door, the always locked door, the door that was never, ever to be opened. It was standing slightly ajar, just a sliver of profound, impossible darkness showing between the door and the frame. A darkness even deeper than the black in the font, a darkness that was alive, and as I watched, frozen in terror, I saw the door begin to open wider, slowly, silently, inch by inch, moving on its own, revealing more of that nothingness, a blackness that seemed to swallow the light from the stained glass windows, leaching the color and life from the very air around it. A cold wind blew out from the opening darkness, carrying with it the smell of that hidden crypt, of dry bones and infinite age, of soil that had never felt the sun. And from within that expanding void, I heard the singing begin again. But this time it wasn't coming from the choir loft above. It was coming from the door itself. From the heart of that darkness, the melody was the same twisted hymn, but the voices were clearer now, layered and multitudinous, and they were no longer singing wordless notes. They were singing my name, weaving it into that awful, beautiful harmony, calling me forward.